So I made a poll.
Let's not stand on ceremony here.
Asking one simple question: which warrior was the most ruthless? And the results was not even close. Around 2.6 thousand people voted and Frank Castle won with 48% of the votes. Leonidas comes second with 25%, Bane took 16% and Achilles surprisingly ended last with 12%.
There are no pacts between lions and men.
Now, first, I have to correct something. Some people in the comments were right. Not everyone of this list is technically a warrior. Leonidas was a warrior.
Spartans! What is your profession?
Achilles was a warrior, even if we are talking about the mythological figure.
Imagine a king who fights his own battles.
But Frank Castle is more of the vigilante, a former soldier, a one-man war machine, and Bane is not really a warrior in the traditional sense. He is more like a terrorist, a strategist, a brutal revolutionary, depending of which version we are talking about. So yes, the word warrior was not perfect, but the real question was never just about who fight in battle. The real question was this: who is the most ruthless? And that is where the conversation become interesting, because being ruthless is not the same thing as being strong, it's not the same thing as being brave, and it is not even the same thing as being violent. Ruthless is about how far someone is willing to go once they decide that mercy is no longer matters. And that is how so many people voted for Frank Castle. One comment said, Frank is the definition of ruthless, and honestly that explained the entire results. Frank Castle does not fight like a king. He does not fight for glory. He does not fight because the gods chose him. He fights like a man who already lost the part of himself that know how to stop. That is what makes him different. Leonidas has discipline, Achilles has rage, Bane has ideology, but Frank has something colder. Frank has a mission, and when Frank decides that someone belongs to the wrong side of the mission, there's almost nothing left to discuss. Another comment said that Leonidas and Achilles fight efficiently, but Frank took things one step further by making his enemies suffer before ending them. That is the dark point, but it is also exactly how people see Frank as more ruthless. Leonidas kill as a soldier, Achilles kill as a legendary fighter, Bane kill as a part of the plan, Frank kills because punishment itself becomes human, and this is how the votes make sense. Frank Castle is not the strongest person on the list. If this was a physical fight, Bane would be a nightmare. If this a mythological power, Achilles would be about almost everyone. If this was leadership, discipline and battlefield courage, Leonidas would stand at the top. Frank Castle wins because his violence is personal, direct and almost impossible to negotiate it with. He is not trying to correct a city, he is not trying to impress an army, he is not trying to become a legend, he is trying to erase the people he believes deserve punishment. That's make him terrifying in a completely different way. Now Leonidas still deserves respect here. One viewer pointed out that Leonidas was in his 60s at Thermopylae, standing with 300 highly trained Spartans against a massive Persian force. That is not just bravery, that is almost impossible discipline. Leonidas was ruthless in the sense of endurance. He knew the situation, he knew the odds, and he still stand there. But his ruthlessness was not chaos, it was controlled. It belongs to the military code, to Spartans, to duty, to sacrifice. Leonidas was not ruthless because he enjoyed destruction. He was ruthless because the weakness was not allowed in the world that created him. That is a different kind of brutality, called discipline antique, but still bounded by honor. Frank Castle is less bound by honor. That is the difference. Then we have Bane, and I think Bane getting 16% actually makes sense. One comment said Bane has zero care for anyone who was not directly useful to the plan. That is probably the best way to describe him. Bane is not just the physical dangerous, he is mentally dangerous.
Unnecessary evil.
He can break people before he touches them. He understands fear, pressure, symbolism, crowd, power. Frank is more direct. Bane is more theatrical. Frank come for the target. Bane built an entire system around making people collapses. That is how Bane is ruthless in a political way. He does not just want to defeat someone, he wants to make the defeat mean something. He wants the public to watch, he wants hope to die slowly, and that is a different kind of cruelty. But still, Bane lost because his ruthlessness is often strategical. He can delay, he can manipulate, he can use people as pieces on a board. Frank does not feel like a chess player. Frank feels like the final consequences after the chess game is already over. And then there is Achilles. This one surprised me the most. Achilles only got 12%, and some people in the comments were not happy about that. One person said Achilles is the only right answer because we are not evaluating guns but the fierceness of the warriors, and I understand that argument because Achilles is not normal. Achilles is rage turned into meat. He's the kind of figure who does not just fight elements, he becomes a storm in the battlefield. If the question was who is the fearless warriors, Achilles probably win. If the question was who is the most legendary fighter, Achilles probably win again. But Ruthless is not only about how many people you can kill, it is about the mind behind the violence. Achilles is terrifying because of rage, but the rage burns. Frank is terrifying because his purpose does not burn out. Achilles can be consumed by emotion. Frank is already consumed, and that makes him more dangerous in the modern way. One comment said Achilles killed more men in his life than Frank Castle could ever count. Maybe that is true inside the mythology frame, but again, body count is not the whole point. Ruthlessness is not mathematics. It is not just numbers, it is the absence of hesitation. It is what makes person become when mercy is removed from the question. And that is how this will become more interesting than I expected, because the audience was not really voting for the best fighter, they were voting for the one who feels less capable of stopping. Leonidas respect discipline, Achilles respect rage, Bane respect calculated domination, Frank Castle respect punishment without mercy. This is how Frank won, not because he is the strongest, not because he is the most heroic, and not because he is the most legendary, but because when people think of ruthlessness, they think of someone who has crosses a line and never come back. Frank Castle is not a warrior in the antique sense. He is something more modern and maybe more disturbing. He is what happens when soldiers survive the war, but the war survives inside him. So yes, I should have worded the poll better. Not all of them are warriors, but the audience still understand the deeper question, and based on the votes, the answer was clear. Leonidas was the most disciplined, Achilles was the fearless, Bane was the most strategic, but Frank Castle was the most ruthless.